You may have seen my video from a week or two ago discussing why men are driven away from body positivity and fat activism, and the rug pull at the end is very significant to today's video. In case you missed it, here it is.
Maybe this actually answers my original question of where all the insecure fat men are. Maybe they're all just incels.
Since making that video, there's almost been some level of synchronicity, since every fat activist related post that's come on my Reddit homepage or YouTube recommendations has only proven my original point further. Not only do fat activists really hate men, especially hate fat men, and demand attractive men's attention, they also love talking about every little thing in their lives that has a marginally sexual connotation. Or actually, they're the ones adding the predatory overtones to banal encounters. If you aren't exactly sure what an incel or a femcel is, I can sum it up pretty easily. Incel, which was originally infcel, is short for involuntary celibate. Just a fun bit of trivia here, but the term was originated by a woman in the 90s when she created a website that helped lonely or incel people find happy mutual love. I say this as ironic as the modern incel movement is often violent and extremely misogynistic, sparking multiple terrorist attacks, fostering a culture of hatred, and encouraging men to assault women on incel blogs. Incels are men, and they do not believe that women can be involuntary celibate since they're apparently all sex objects that all men are desperate to throw themselves at. And I don't know about you lot, but I think that this type of attitude is probably why they're all still single. However, female incels, femcels, do exist even if they aren't as violently minded or misandrist as their male counterparts. They believe that all men are inherently evil, pig-headed, emotionally stunted, and essentially good for nothing but money and sex. Femcels like to criticize men as a monolith constantly, claiming that they are all subpar to women for a number of reasons. They like to say things such as, kill all men, without a hint of irony, but then get irrationally angry when we don't want anything to do with them. Incels and femcels also tend to victimize themselves and wallow in their own misery, refusing to self-reflect or work on the more antisocial, unattractive, or destructive parts of themselves, but also showing an immense amount of disgust towards people who are technically on their level. They both use the decile scale to rank a person's value and intend to date up the scale. This massive sense of entitlement may link to an incel or femcel's inflated ego if they exhibit other narcissistic or antisocial traits, but it may just be projection. Incels don't like women who they consider ugly or below them since they are reminded of how ugly or weak they actually are. And femcels don't date men who are as ugly or weak as they are. Incels often follow dating gurus or coaches who in all honesty are just running pyramid schemes for desperate people, and these coaches describe relationships in such a way that you start to wonder why they actually want one. They're encouraged to seek out partners by means of shallow deception, and any sexual, romantic, or even platonic exchanges are seldom described as anything other than an exchange of power. That's probably more than enough of a crash course into inceldom and red pill overdosing for now. I'm scared that if I talk about this anymore, I'll sprout a puby neckbeard, start smelling putrid, and eat enough junk food to gain 200 pounds overnight. Hold on. That's just like the stars of today's video. Those of you who are well versed in fat acceptance and sanity will likely have connected the dots already. All the traits of a femcel apply to a fat activist, especially their sexual appetites that can only be described as desperate at best and exhibitionistic at worst. One recurrent theme in the world of fat activism is the concept of punching up and engaging in dominant submissive behaviours in which they choose to play up and weaponize their weakness in order to emotionally manipulate and thus control others around them. The punching up element applies here too. They will often use self-perceived, imaginary oppression as an excuse to attack and bully people who they are jealous of, so then if the people they are degrading say anything to defend themselves, the situation can be twisted. We see this kind of behaviour the most when fat activists discuss their probably imaginary sex lives. You see, they will punch up by saying that thin women aren't real women, that they are agents of the patriarchy, and that they intentionally maintain a normal body weight simply to please men. This degradation and objectification is then justified by the fat activist, who claims that being thin is fatphobic, and fatphobia is essentially just racism, homophobia, and ableism. Healthy weight and thin women are additionally accused of being too privileged to have any weight-related struggles, and this extends to body image or dating. If a thin woman says she struggles with her self-image or doesn't feel confident in her appearance when dating, fat activists then accuse her of being fatphobic, patriarchal, and emotionally weak. They can then take the moral high ground once again, not only portraying themselves as more enlightened, but much more emotionally resilient. Fat activists get angry when thin women so much as breathe, and I've actually compiled a short list of things that you shouldn't be allowed to do unless you're obese. Number 1. Do not post your outfit of the day. Number 2. Do not have body dysmorphia. Number 3. Do not date attractive men. Number 4. Do not mention your weight, ever. Number 5. Do not eat in public. These are just 5, but I'm sure you get the gist. Do not do anything that reminds a fat activist that they aren't attractive, they are not healthy, or that they actually do overeat and have damaged their bodies completely by themselves. Here, they're passing off blame, and this is what may be called deflection. Deflection allows them to ignore their own problems by blaming them on everyone else, and this also allows them to feel justified in their punching up behaviour since they maintain their internal status as a perpetual victim. Another trait I see here in both incels and fat activists is projection. Projection involves an individual nitpicking and criticising others based on their own insecurities, which is something that they accuse ex-fats who criticise fat acceptance of doing. That in itself is of course deflection. Projection within fat activism can take many forms, but the one I'm most interested in today is their projection of sexual insecurity onto thin women. As I mentioned, they try to portray thin women as being sexually unattractive since they supposedly look like children. This also works as deflection since they can write off all men who don't find fat women attractive as inherently predatory. They project their femcel desperation onto thin women, insinuating that they all intentionally turn themselves into what a fat activist perceives as a male gaze-centric sex object. They project their jealousy and misogyny onto them as well, saying that thin women aren't real women and are inherently patriarchal, blaming the woman instead of acknowledging the real impacts that patriarchal standards have on everyone. However, one of the most prominent behaviours I see is overcompensation. I think that most of you will have heard of the Napoleon complex, at least in passing, in which a short or otherwise physically unassuming man overcompensates for his shortcomings by being excessively aggressive or domineering. In the book that I wrote for some reason, I theorise that if this complex actually does exist, it must have different subtypes, in which men can overcompensate for more than height using different tactics. For example, someone with an intellectual Napoleon subtype may constantly rub their achievements in the faces of others or insult the intelligence of their peers so that they look smarter in comparison, thus hiding their own insecurities surrounding their intellectual abilities. They may do this because they feel like they can overcompensate for something that they are insecure about, and the subtype corresponds to the insecurity. These complex subtypes are also applicable to women, and I've named these Margaret Thatcher subtypes, named of course after Margaret Thatcher. As a side note, I might have to make a whole other video on her since I'm a northerner and she really did us in. The Thatcher subtype I'd like to focus on today is the sexual subtype. A woman who is insecure about her sex life or how attractive she is may overcompensate, deflect, and project onto other women, and this can play out differently in many scenarios. A woman who lives within a conservative culture that pushes ideas of purity may project her insecurities or inadequacies onto women by spreading rumours or casting harsh judgments about their supposed promiscuity. She may claim that other women dress like her, insert derogatory word here, flirt too much, show too much skin, or are too desperate for male attention. Another scenario involves someone like Amberlynn Reid. Not quite so much deflecting or projecting, and just way too much overcompensation. For those who aren't aware, Amberlynn likes to go into massive amounts of detail about her intimate activities when absolutely nobody asked, so much so that most people highly doubt she's telling the truth and is instead overcompensating for her lack of intimacy with her partners. The average femcel fat activist likely falls somewhere between the two. They project feelings of desperation onto thin women by calling them desperate. They deflect criticism or a lack of romantic interest by crying fat phobia, and overcompensate by constantly trying to convince people that they're extremely desirable and have the wildest sex lives ever documented. If you can't tell, I've been dragging my heels a little bit on this part because I really don't want to read any deranged fat activist sex posts. And for this first one, I will say that I'm not entirely sure of the context here, but this Twitter comment tells us a lot about the mindset of a fat activist. They're constantly telling us that if we don't want to have sex with them, then we're fat phobic, and also that women can only be real or attractive if they're fat. Yet here they're equating a larger size with a lower sexual attractiveness. Fat oppression within medical settings that they frequently moan about is now being boiled down to a doctor not wanting to have sex with them, implying that being unattractive due to their obesity is their biggest source of insecurity. The fat activist here has also immediately equated a doctor's professional opinion with a personal and sexual opinion, which isn't something that a person would do unless they were obsessed with sex and desperate to be desired. The poster also complains that the exact number or measurement of their weight isn't recorded, which goes against Hayes' logic since weight measurements apparently have no place in medicine. The impact that weight has on the body is calculated using weight and height rather than just weight, which gives a BMI class. Hey, guess what the word obese is? That poster appeared to be simultaneously deflecting and projecting. They deflected the reality of their weight by blaming fat phobia and chauvinism, and projected their irrational obsession with sex onto the physicians to make them look like the weird ones. One could also argue that they were overcompensating by trying to appear more sexually active or desirable, even though it was completely inappropriate in a situation like that. This next post is also very telling. Thin allies are not only supposed to sleep with fat people, but actively tell people how hot they are, and then go as far as to claim that they wish they were fat too. First of all, if you are so attractive, so appealing, and so sexy, why do you need to beg other people to say that you are? If appearance shouldn't be judged or commented on, then why do you care so much about being perceived as beautiful and sexy? Also, for a group that claims to be life-threateningly oppressed, they seem to want more people to be fat. Fat activists often compare their struggles to those of people of colour or LGBT communities, but I'm yet to see any person of colour reacting well to a white person saying that they wish they could be black or brown, or any LGBT person reacting well to a straight person wishing to be gay. This level of contradiction and giant leap from 0 to 100 indicates overcompensation. If you see my fat acceptance cringe video, you may have also noticed a post in which a woman says, "This is the man that you deserve," showing a very fit man. This may be related to the incel thing I was mentioning earlier, in which relationships are seen as nothing more than an exchange of power or a show of dominance. It is possible that they only want to date up in this way, or date men who are more attractive to stick it to thin women and show them that they are just as attractive because they can pull thin men too. This is like how incels want to date very attractive women so then they could show off in front of all their other male friends and outdo them, almost try to be what they call the alpha male of the group. Fat activists may actually be doing the same thing. On that note, back to incels, we can again see mirrored behaviours. Incels feel very entitled to relationships with attractive women despite a large number of them blaming attractive women for all of their problems. Their dating strategies involve manipulation and deception, and these men are encouraged to behave in ways that would only ever attract shallow women. They genuinely do not like women unless they do what the incel says, and this applies to fat activists. They hate thin men, fat men, fit men, gym goers, thin women, basically anyone that isn't as fat as them or fatter than they are. Yet fat activist women are demanding fit, muscle-bound men, and those who swing the other way demand access to any woman that they want. Both incels and fat activists feel entitled to partners who they do nothing to deserve, and inherently hate them for supposedly oppressing them. If women are such gold-digging ball breakers, why do incels want them? Conversely, if fit men are evil, fat-phobic, shallow agents of patriarchal destruction, why are fat activists so desperate for their approval? I will say that as someone who is 100% asexual, I'm probably not the best qualified when it comes to talking about these matters, and could also be reading far too deep into this. Another possible theory is that the average sex-obsessed fat activist is simply experiencing some form of reverse body dysmorphia, in which they see themselves as extremely attractive and genuinely can't work out why people aren't interested. Depending on how big they are, they might actually look fine, but just have such an aggressive and self-pitying demeanour that they put people off. At the end of the day, if fat activists, femcels or incels had any self-awareness or the capacity to correct their faults, they wouldn't be fat activists, femcels or incels. Thank you for watching this video. I don't know what I personally think about this. I think this was just kind of an interesting thing to write, but as always, let me know what you think about this in the comments and what you'd like to see next. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep making every video about fat activism, and there are a couple of other things that I'd maybe like to talk about as well. Also, ignore my voice in this video. I literally pretty much just got up and thought, well, I'm just going to do it now. Anyway. Any video recommendations, any thoughts, any comments, just leave them here. I love reading your comments. So for now, I'll just see you next time, okay? Goodbye.